Yellow watermelon?
It's also disingenuous to say that like players only play so I think about your hobbies in there.
I'm not going to deny it. And there's a lot of strong living that I disagree with. They're all accumulated to now say snowball. I see you all the time.
So it gets higher and more.
Yeah.
But like yesterday's news.
I might have seen you yesterday.
Maybe we could edit through
And then so when you said in the middle of the meeting, like between the sticks and balls, wrap inside something like that, and I got a text that said, oh, I think it's all done.
On Google Maps. Is actually the only person in the picture. Also, I don't know if you want to like find out except for family, but like he's the only person that's on Google Maps.
it's either like I have them or if he has me, I don't have them.
It's not an iPhone. Or in the area.
How would I have his iPhone?
He used to be on iPhone, but not anymore.
Yeah, but maybe iPad. I don't think it's a watermelon. It is a watermelon. I don't know what yeah.
This is not watermelon. You can feel it. This is what
Whatever she did. Dip is red.
I like thirsty.
Why is it yellow?
Because there's yellow watermelon.
And that was like, what's going on? You have me a bowl?
How much? Not going to stomach at all. Yeah.
They're very random. Because I'm sure I'll see it assuming that I'll see it.
But when you come back from Turkey, could I request a souvenir magnet from the airport? Sure. On the way out.
Like a turkey one?
Yeah, Turkey. They have Istanbul ones as well. They have like Capitalism.
Honestly, like, one time I went, they had pyro. And I asked the guy, I was like, why is there pyro? It's like, they sent us from upstate. So I was like, no, why do you have a guy? He's like, because it's back. So he's putting something anyways. Some lucky guy that forgot to get his pyro magnet.
I mean, it's a bit fair, like, the amount of people I have to
Yeah.
That was a vibe.
It is, bro. Let's see what's going on. He is. He's at work.
Oh, right.
And I know him through morning ride today at 9:43.
Is that airport?
It's like an airfield. No, that's his house. And that's his
They have to go to Sunnyvale also.
that's his ride yesterday. And his morning ride on August 20th.
That's it. His life is just a bunch of lines.
It's a straight shot too. Like, this guy pretty much sticks to the exact same route every day. It's so insane.
Man, literally lives like, how far was it, buddy?
It's like 6 miles.
6 miles. Wow. Bike, yeah.
How long is Omar supposed to stay there? Like 90 days total.
I don't know if he is sure, but looking at grad programs, try to extend his stay. The grad program, or I think he might have been found a second option.
What a guy.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Like,
What a guy. When he told me, sitting around his like, all the time, he's like, oh, Schwab.
oh yeah.
This guy's living.
So it's so funny because he did Malaysia, and like that whole summer he was like by the skin test kind of like, and then started working again after Malaysia, and then
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
he's back to doing the same thing.
So we are going to get started in 30 seconds. If you would please take your seats, we would greatly appreciate it. And we'll open up with an icebreaker question. So please do sit down. All right.
If you're here for the kahwa, then please take your seats. We really appreciate it.
Okay, my mic is hot now. Thank you, Sana. Also, just a heads up, we're live streaming today, so don't do anything too crazy. Yeah, as soon as you started, we actually started live streaming the instant you started talking. We thought of the signal, like, go. So while people are still coming in, we're going to open up with an icebreaker question. So for this one, just turn to your person on your right, turn to your person on your left. If you've never met them before, introduce yourself, shake their hand. The question is, what is your biggest impulse buy? Like, what is your go-to impulse buy? So go ahead and talk about it for 2 minutes. I'm sorry.
What is it?
Ever in my life, like I used to be better. Like, if I wanted something, when I was sit up
I'm doing good, bro. Doing good. Just seen you again.
You know what? You do whatever you want to do. I can move the
But is there like gene associated with like
I don't think so. I think it's just
not?
I'll just take this and
cheated.
don't worry, no problem. I want you to be
That's
like,
Yeah, I pretty much like I've been pretty good about watching recently too. Because we don't believe in like flying.
Alright, in 2 minutes, would anyone be open to sharing what their biggest impulse buy is? Or what your friend's biggest impulse buy is? Any volunteers at all? Alright, Slaughter, you want to go for it? Alright. Everyone, please be quiet. I really want to hear the answer to this one. It can be either or. Yeah.
Can you hear the name coming from?
Wow. Say less. Let me go get myself a very left.
Thank you. I feel like you want to share a lot of details about this MacBook. But do you like the MacBook Pro?
Yes.
Then great. I hope it was well worth
Help me
it.
with all my cookie workout.
Alhamdulillah. Fantastic. It's the best use of the laptop.
Yes.
And ChatGPT. Thanks. You're just like having all the strays today. They're self-inflicted. Would anyone else like to share? Anyone at all?
What's the question?
I'm cool sharing mine. I mean, like my number one probably impulse buy. It's probably the little Lego sets that are like on the by the cash register. I like those. I like little chocolates, and I like chapstick, the cherry kind. I'm always getting those. It's true. Completely unrelated topics. You know, I need to get more actually. I gotta get a target. See what's happening. Chapsticks. Yeah.
How often use chopsticks?
Anyone, I would really like to hear from at least one more person. Anyone at all. Sama. What's like the number one? So when you see like one of those spinny things, that's like heaven on earth with all the sunglasses on. No?
You're radiating.
Perfume and sunglasses. Alright. So one final call if anyone would like to share. Anyone at all? There's no wrong answers unless it's like yeah, unless it's like literally wrong, no wrong answer. You want to share? Pokemon cards? Pokemon cards. And you buy Pokemon cards for my kids. Oh, okay. I was about to say. Really like revelatory. Oh, shiny Cinderace. It's insane. Oh my god. Yeah. Yeah, when you go to the cash register, you're like, that's for my kids, it's for my kids. But really it's for you. Because then they're like, why do you have to... Yeah. I know. You gotta get that Charizard, for sure. So without further ado, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you very much for coming to the inaugural section of Conscious Capitalism. This is the latest series in the grounding. It is led by Brother Owen Sheriff over here. He recently did a couple events for us, including the Tapestry. He's actually an excellent resource on economic and financial matters. So if you have any follow-up questions, I strongly recommend coming to him after that. I feel like I'm gassing him up. But again, we'd like to thank you very much for coming here. The plan for today is we're going to go for about 30-40 minutes of lecture, and then after that we're going to shift into a discussion circle. And again, if this is your first time, my name is Omar. It's very nice to meet you. I hope you have a fantastic time. have questions or feedback after. And thank you again for being here. So without further ado, please give it up for Brother Lobo.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammadan rasulullah. So for those that don't know me, I'll do a very just quick introduction. I hate doing introductions, but I'll just do it very quickly. So Awais Sheikh, I was born and raised in this area, in this community, alhamdulillah. I lived overseas for a few years in high school. Came back to Virginia Tech. Any Hokies in the house?
Woo! Let's go.
All right, go Hokies. So went to Virginia Tech. My undergrad was in a degree called Business and Information Technology. Graduated, moved back in this area, started working, eventually got my MBA, got another master's in corporate innovation entrepreneurship. And did 2 decades of work in corporate, right? Like people here, started as a project manager, program manager, did consulting, management consulting, strategy consulting stuff. Most recently I was at Amazon Web Services. I led strategy for our federal nonprofit healthcare business unit. I still say our for some reason. I left there and I left corporate a year ago almost. Actually, almost exactly a year ago. And a lot of that journey was actually based off of some of the stuff that I've just continuously been reflecting on and thinking about. Probably even more reflection since leaving. Me and a few partners of mine started Forerunners. And we'll talk a little bit about Forerunners, but essentially the idea behind Forerunners is that one of the areas that we don't talk enough about when it comes to how do we change society for the better, how do we live our values, even our Islamic values, is through business, right? Business is a way where we can actually bring values into the wilderness. How many people do you know that have met a Muslim in the masjid or at an open house? Yeah, there's a few. But how many people have met and interacted with Muslims at the workplace or because they did business with them or that type of thing, right? And unfortunately, sometimes that experience may not be as positive, and that results on a reflection of what our values are to the outside world. So we think that there is important work to be done to bring more business-minded people through understanding our own tradition, and through that helping to spread a values-oriented, purpose-oriented ethos around business, right? Which for today we'll call conscious capitalism, and we'll talk about that. All right. Before going further, I kind of want to know why you guys are here. Honestly, like what brings you here? What are you trying to answer? What goes to your mind when you saw this? Is it just like the nice qahwa food and a chance to hang out with friends? I'd love to hear from a couple people. Now we'll start here.
I want to become more knowledgeable about halal spend and halal wealth.
Okay.
As someone who's involved, like, when he spends money.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm doing it in like the best way possible.
Yeah.
I think prior to someone who really was intentional about it.
Yeah.
Besides like. I'm not gonna buy some Nestle. Like I heard, but like I think that it goes so much more deeper than that. So.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's the whole idea of consciousness, right? And consciousness is really on taqwa, so it's the idea of how do we elevate the consciousness. So consciousness is often taqwa is often translated as fear of Allah or fear of God, but I think more deeply it's consciousness of Allah, consciousness of God. And so how does that extend into how we spend money? I saw this hand here, so Nizam?
SubhanAllah, probably like a week ago, a couple of days before I saw the announcement for conscious capitalism, it just crossed my mind the idea of capitalism and just generally how the economy is going these days and wealth inequality in our country and a lot of other places. And the thought that crossed my mind was altruistic capitalism. Because at the moment I was just like, actually I think
where's Omar? We gotta get this guy in the marketing team.
Yeah, man.
Altruistic capitalism.
But it was just an idea. I was like, okay, great. Let's start talking to people, see what our thoughts are on capitalism, or especially a lot of folks are considering other forms of economy and commerce. So for me, just hopefully through good conversation, we can explore those topics.
Awesome. Let's do couple more. I saw a hand here. So.
there was like a couple things that I'm curious about, like in regards to competition, and like of course you also want what's best for your brothers, but then also making sure you're doing the best for yourself and balancing that with something else. Yeah, that's always something I'm thinking of.
Super interesting. And I love that point about, and we'll talk about one of the characteristics of capitalism is competition, right? Well, what does that mean in an Islamic context? Are we competing with each other, you know, if we're fellow brothers and sisters? Let's do one more.
I'm just curious, like, this thing's about corporate, like, you work for banks, like, that's big around here. Are you good about, like, or, like, what, can you take a business loan? Like, how does that work? How do you think about that?
Yeah, we're steeped into the corporate environment. There's a saying I love that I have in the back of my mind. I'd love for you to have in the back of your mind as we're talking through this, which is the fish isn't sick, the water's dirty, right? And so we're all kind of fish swimming, and we're like wondering, okay, well, am I working for a corporation? I'm working for a bank? I'm doing this. I'm spending money on this. I'm getting money here. You know, how much of that is a result of you know, me doing the right thing, and how much of that is a result of the system that I'm around? So I just want to level set with you guys here, because there's a lot of things that you might be interested in and here to talk about. There is this idea of kind of when you hear about a term like capitalism or economics or spending money, raising, you know, earning money, there is a micro version of that, right? Like, oh, can I, like the sister said, can I work for a bank? You know, is it okay if I have this type of a mortgage versus that type of a mortgage? You know, trust me, I am not the qualified person to talk about that. So I will not be issuing fatwas. I am not going to be talking about, you know, is it halal to do this, haram to do that. Alhamdulillah, we got plenty of those resources in the house. Imam Majid, Sheikh Abdul Ravid, Dr. Nassimi, we can bring in some experts if there's interest. That is not what I'm here about, right? What I want to do over the course of these next 3 weeks is kind of reflect on, yeah, a little bit of the micro, but where does the micro fit in the context of the macro? Right? Let's actually reflect a little bit about the systems that we're in, why we're in the systems that we are, how well do they align with our Islamic understanding, and then what do we need to change in the micro and macro level, right? And I want to talk about why this topic is important. I talked about forerunners and why we think business is important, but specifically this idea of if you go to, let's just say for argument, we talked about capitalism being about, partially about, building and accumulating wealth, right? I mean, simplistic, building and accumulating wealth. I feel like Muslim, like our community, has like, who feels like we have a really good relationship with that concept as a community? Anyone feel like we have a good, yeah, kind of, maybe sort of, so-so? I would argue we, in general, not like individuals, but as a whole, as a society, I don't know that we have a really good relationship, like from an intellectual heritage point of view. Right? On one hand, you have you know, people who, mashallah, they might you know really be focused on incorporating their Islam, you know, as it relates to raising their families, as it relates to the schooling they're providing, as it relates to, you know, their time in the masjid, what they, you know, learn and teach and that kind of thing. But when it comes to building and accumulating wealth, whether that is working for a company, starting a business, selling stuff, it's kind of like, I call it like the extension of separation of church and state, right? Where it's like, well, yeah, but the Islam stuff doesn't carry over here, right? Like I'm just going to do whatever I learn, right? I took an MBA, so I'm going to use what I learned at an MBA class. I'm going to learn what I learned from hustling, you know, selling Pokemon cards, like whatever it is, to figure out how to build and accumulate wealth, right? Because Islam, even though intellectually I might know that, yeah, there are fiqh concepts around, you know, riba and these kinds of things, but in general it doesn't cross my mind about like, what is the Islamic paradigm? Someone didn't like that. What's the Islamic paradigm for building and accumulating wealth, right? That's like on one side of the spectrum. On the other side of the spectrum, people are like, astaghfirullah, you know, building and accumulating wealth, what are you talking about? You know, we should be in the masjid, we should be kind of wearing clothes that are like not the best clothes, and we should be ascetic, we should have zuhud. Have you heard this concept of zuhud, right? You know, we should be people who are not immersed in dunya, right? And so like this concept of, so there's kind of a feeling, I'll just call it a feeling, right? Of like, oh, the concept of building and accumulating wealth, or even, dare I say, power, right, through wealth, is like, that's not an, if you're Islamic, or if you're trying to be a better Muslim, that's probably not something you should be pursuing, right? And that's a super extreme statement, right? But I'm just saying, like, I feel like we kind of operate on those two extremes when I hear about people talking about this topic. And so I feel like, well, the right way is somewhere in between, right? The right way is somewhere in between. The right way, acknowledges that Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in a hadith, the truthful and trustworthy merchant is in Jannah with the prophets, the Siddiqeen, and the Shuhada, the martyrs, and those who are verifiers or ascertain the truth. That's high company, right? That's high company. And yet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also, throughout the Quran, and especially like the verses that a lot of us have memorized from the last juz, there's a lot of business-oriented language in those verses. But it turns business on its head, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about أَرَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. Do you know the one that denies a deen, right? This concept of the day of judgment, or even religion itself. فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدْعُ الْيَتِيمَ وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. So it's the one who rejects the orphan, right? It doesn't feed those that are needed. So it's connecting like a religious belief to an economic system, right? And trying to upend that in an economic system. Like, so the Quraysh, like, it's not that they didn't believe Islam because they didn't believe in the theology of it necessarily. Some of them maybe didn't believe in the theology of it, but it upended an economic and political system that existed in Arabia, right? So it at least behooves us to just reflect. I'm not going to answer a lot of questions or all the questions in this week and the next 2 weeks, but I do want to pose a lot of questions. And I do want us to pose questions to ourselves and become just aware, right? So the way that I want to do this over the next 3 weeks is today's conversation is really about understanding how we got to where we are. Like, you can't really criticize something or critique something or really, give an alternative unless you kind of understand what this thing is, where it came from, how it evolved, right? So today, I was telling my wife, like, I run the risk today of being in like college professor mode, and I promise I'm not going to try to be in college professor mode, right? Like, I'm not going to try to be like super, just dense and like be a historian or something like that, but I do want to give enough to understand, like, where did this thing come from? Like, what are the actual characteristics of this thing we're calling about when we say capitalism, right? And then towards the end of the session, I want to talk about, well, what are some of the critiques? Like, what are some of the problems with it? In a societal sense broadly, but also from an Islamic perspective, right? And then next week, inshallah, we're going to talk about, well, what is the Islamic paradigm for something called capitalism? Didn't exist, right, at that time, but let's just call it commerce and trade and buying and selling. Like, what's the Islamic paradigm? Because part of the problem is when we have like Islamic finance conversations, someone else is dictating the terms of the conversation, and we're trying to like figure out how we fit into that, right? And look, that's a necessity sometimes. Like, we do live in a system where we have to figure that stuff out. That's like the sister saying, well, can I work for a bank, or what type of mortgage? Like, we've got to figure that stuff out. But I want us to elevate our thinking, right? I want us to think about, well, what does Islam have to say about this stuff, right? What's the Islamic paradigm? And then start to say, okay, where does this term of capitalism and through its evolution, where does it come from and emerge? The last thing I want to say, just setting the stage, is, subhanAllah, I don't believe that it is an accident when we think about the divine planning of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He sends this final message, right, this Quran, in a land where the only reason that land was able to sustain itself was through people who were engaged in trade. Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a merchant. He was someone who was engaged in trade. His wife Khadija radiallahu anha, who was also his employer, you could argue, there's a book that I'll talk more about next week, but Benedict Kohler, he talks about early Islam and the birth of capitalism, and he likens Khadija radiallahu anha to a modern-day venture capitalist, right? Kind of provocative, but it'd be interesting to kind of think what that's like. I don't think it's an accident that this final message was sent to a place where their job was to trade, And subhanAllah, why were they known as a place of trade? Because people came for a religious reason. They came to visit, even, we know, right, that even before Islam, people would come to Mecca and the Kaaba to perform Hajj or visitation, right? While people were there, there's a great opportunity to engage in trade. Like, I don't think it's an accident that that was the environment, that was the container in which this final message was sent as a catalyst to spread all over the world, right? Allah Alam, I don't believe that that's just a coincidence, right? And the fact that then the Muslims migrated from kind of a trade-based society, one economic system, to an agrarian economic system, right, in Medina, where it's no longer about trading, it was about producing stuff from the ground, right, and picking that and selling it, right, a whole different economic system. I mean, it's amazing to me that in the 23 years, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose these two economies, and the first thing that Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam established in Medina was the masjid and the market. The masjid and the market. The masjid and the market. I don't know. I think there's something to that. I'd love to get your thoughts, inshallah, on that. Okay. So I'm going to do a little bit of kind of what is capitalism. So let me just add. I mean, what do you, when I say capitalism, give me like a one-sentence definition of what you think it is. Don't worry, this isn't like, no one, the camera's pointed this way, so no one will know who said what. Yeah.
It's a system where individuals or organizations themselves, they like own the means to produce what they want, essentially call their own shots to produce.
So a couple things you called out there, individuals and organizations, right? And they are essentially the ones that are calling the shots on how to produce and sell stuff, right? Let's just call it that. Regulated. Unregulated. Okay. Okay, so capitalism inherently implies kind of a lack of regulation.
It's the most unregulated system.
Yeah. 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 No, it's good. We'll talk about that. Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of supply and demand.
Supply and demand. Oh man, who took economics, right? Those graphs, supply and demand. Where's what's the price curve? Oof. We're not gonna be doing that. Don't worry. Alhamdulillah. Okay. So I'm gonna throw up a definition here. So the definition I'll throw up is, it's an economic system that is characterized by private ownership of the means of production. Private ownership of the means of production. That may not mean anything, right? But private ownership of means of production. The pursuit of profit. So that's like the thing that you're pursuing, your objective. And operation of markets where goods and services are exchanged. And we'll talk about more characteristics, but let's just, this isn't like sure you talked to a bunch of people who study this stuff that have a lot of different nuances of the definition, but I just want to call some things out, okay? One, it is an economic system, right? It's not a political system, it's not a social system. I say that because sometimes when you talk and hear about, people criticizing capitalism, they're like blame it for everything, right? And I mean, look, it has a lot of problems, but it's not a political system, right? It's not a social system. Now, the economic system and the pursuit of that economic system may lead to people in power making certain decisions. So it may influence political dynamics, right? It might lead to certain social norms being established in the society. So it can influence social movements or social norms or some of those types of things. But capitalism, again, it's an economic system, right? Private ownership of means of production. What does that mean? What does that mean to you guys?
And it's not owned by the government.
Yeah, it's not owned by the government. Go ahead. Yeah.
Workers don't own what they create.
What's that?
That workers don't own what they create?
Yeah, so workers, yeah, that's one of the manifestations of this, right? That the workers don't necessarily own always what they create. Yeah.
So I was gonna say, so yeah, basically adding on to, it's not only the government that owns all the means of production, but any single entity does
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
own.
Yeah. So you have it. So private means, as the brother was saying, individuals or corporations or entities that are not the government, right, are owning the things that make the goods and services. And what are they trying to do with them? What's their objective? Sell them for a profit, right? Pretty okay. And then there is a marketplace, or when I say marketplace, I don't mean like a literal one, but there is a place where there is a quote-unquote free exchange of goods and services, right, for value. There's a value exchange that occurs. And through that value exchange, it's between those private entities that are all mutually pursuing profit. Okay? Again, there's a lot more we could get into, but I think for basically what we're talking about, let's just go with that. Any concerns there? Okay, so what are some of the characteristics of capitalism? So I'll list a few down. Sorry, say that again?
It's exploitive.
But yeah, we're not evaluating yet, but you're not wrong. Yeah, it can be exploitative, absolutely. I'm just giving like the hopefully just the facts. Okay. So some of the key characteristics, the brother here said it, you know, earlier. What's your name, bro? No, he's gone. Oh man. I was gonna give him credit, huh? Ali. Okay, Ali was talking about competition, right? So one of the characteristics, if you have private entities that are producing goods and selling them in the marketplace, that there is competition, right? In order to do that. And as a result of that competition, consumers have a choice. So let's use like a modern example, right? If I wanted to get a phone right now, this is kind of a weird example because some of the aspects of phone economics don't follow capitalism. But for brother's example, they have multiple manufacturers that are in competition, right? Apple, Google, Samsung, whatever, right? They're selling and they're all in competition. So how do they compete? They try to cut prices, they try to innovate. You know, one of them innovates, then Apple innovates, and then says it. I'm just kidding. Sorry, Apple. So the result of that is that now I, as a consumer, have a choice in the marketplace, right? I can choose which one I want to buy. It's not like there's only one provider of phones that's out there. There's no government that's saying you have to have only this type of phone. There's options, right? Capital accumulation. A lot of people are like, what is capital? I know, sorry, this is like basic stuff. What is capital? Can be money, can be resources, credit, right? Anything that are tools, equipment, resources that are used to help pursue production of something at a profit, right? That's capital. And the idea is that corporations and individuals have ways of accumulating those things. That's how they provide an advantage, right? Is that over time, they figure out either through technology, through a business model, through a particular patent, right? These are all things that they have that they can use to produce new things, produce those things better, and improve their profits, right? So the idea is there is a capital accumulation that occurs, and there's this concept of risk reward, right? In theory, what capitalism is supposed to encourage is that the people who are willing to put risk forward in terms of entering into a market, producing something new, lowering prices, they can lose big, but they can also win big, right? Okay. Okay, this is the part, let me see what time we're at. Oh man, sorry, where's Omar with his, yeah, thank you. I'm gonna like super quickly go through a little bit of history, because here's the thing. This is like a definition aspect of capitalism. Capitalism has not existed in this pure form throughout history. has taken various different forms. So again, for you to understand it, you have to understand, like, when someone says capitalism, what are they, like, you gotta unpack that, right? Like, what does that actually mean? So for example, before there was something that was called capitalism, you know, officially as terminology, there was in like the 16th, 17th, 18th century, something called mercantilism. Any of you heard of that? Mercantilism? Okay. Mercantilism is very simple. Basically, it wasn't an economic system. It's actually a political system, but masquerading as an economic system. But the idea was that a quote-unquote nation, didn't have nation states, but you know, an empire, whatever, civilization, if they can produce and sell more, right, we call that now exporting, right? If we can export more, then we have to buy from other people, then we have influence and power. Right? Does that sound familiar? I mean, some of those things are still relevant in, you know, political terms today. Right? That's why, think of 16th, 17th century, why the Spanish Empire and, you know, went to South America, why the British Empire went everywhere, why the French Empire, like why they went, because they said, hey, rather than us buying stuff from someplace else and being under the influence of somebody, we can go and, you know, get those resources, and that has more influence for us, right? So again, not a fully baked economic system, but it had hallmarks of, you know, characteristics. Then 18th, 19th, 20th century, Industrial Revolution. A lot of people know that, you can go through the history, but it's super impactful, right? This concept of just operationalizing some of these core concepts, because now all of a sudden, when we say what is capital, it's like, wow, we can actually like produce stuff much more efficiently, much faster, and cheaper. How many people have ever bought like a handmade carpet or a handmade like piece of clothing or something, right? It's pretty expensive, yeah? And is it easy to get? Like, is it short? Is it like, hey, can you just make this, you know, thing real quick? I'll go mall, shop, come back? No, right? It takes a while, okay? So what the Industrial Revolution did was basically say, hey, we can make this much cheaper, much easier for people to make stuff. That'll allow us to increase our competition. It'll allow us to lower the price and thereby increase profit, right? So, and it led to, you know, the rise of wage labor, right? So now it's easy for me to pay people X amount per hour. They move into these things that we now call cities, right? Urbanization. There's a whole, I mean, there's a lot of stuff, right? That happens. Eventually, like this stuff starts to become what the sister said, it's pretty exploitative, right? And eventually workers are like, hey, this kind of stinks, right? Like we need to have some rights in terms of what we're doing. They start figuring out unions and that type of thing. So you have this idea of wage capitalism that comes into play, where now you have this thing where someone said that a characteristic of capitalism is not being regulated. Well, now in the capitalist system that we have, we start introducing regulation or workers' rights or some of those types of things. By the way, it wasn't purely just the social unrest and like altruistic motives. Definitely wasn't altruistic capitalism. I think the companies also realized like, hey, if we actually pay these people health benefits, you know, they might actually work better. You know, we might actually get the best of the workers, right? So it was a way for them to actually differentiate themselves, right? Then there's state-led, like, you know, state-led, there's not really capitalism. So, I mean, we basically had like world wars and things like that happened where people were like, hey, the state should control certain things. So even things that we normally think of you know, like there are things, so we call ourselves, for example, in America, a capitalist society, right? But there are still, it's not pure. There are still things in this society or in this economy that are not open to the free market, right? Electricity, your utilities, right? It's not like, you know, a private company owns those things, right? Those are things which are the public domain. There are places where there's not a marketplace. Like you can't go into an open marketplace for like nuclear weapons. Like that's not, you know, because the government basically said, hey, that's probably not, you know, you shouldn't. If you do, don't talk to me. Like, right? So there are aspects of our system that are not purely unregulated or fall from that. The opposite of kind of the state version is a laissez-faire, which is like in the 19th century. So a lot of people, when they think of capitalism, they think of laissez-faire capitalism, which is basically like, let it all, like, it's basically like, we don't want any regulation, we don't want any monopoly, we basically want to have open, unfettered access to competition, right? Anywhere that's around. And this, by the way, is, so this like balance of what should the state control and own, how much like regulation should there be for the protection of, you know, workers and the people that are working, and basically the underlying philosophy of laissez-faire capitalism is the idea that the best solution to, you know, what the marketplace needs, what you and I need, is best determined by the market. No government should be telling you what to do. No other person should be telling you what to do. This open free market and the rules that we govern around it are the best thing to determine the allocation of resources. Right? That's like the philosophy. And then other people over time are like, well, I don't know. You know, sometimes the market might cause something like, I don't know, access to healthcare to not be distributed equitably. We might want to do something about that. This is all the tension that kind of exists. And again, it's an economic thing, but it leads to political, it leads to social, it leads to a whole bunch of things. Okay, last bit of, are you guys still with me? Is this like super boring? Yeah? Okay. You're like, no, it's not boring. I'm like, I need more coffee. I do just want to talk a little bit about the rise of, thank you. So there is like a recent brand of capitalism that we almost like take for granted, like it's always existed, but it's actually fairly recent, right? This idea of like corporate-led capitalism, the rise of large corporations, right? Corporations exist. We learned this, like anyone who's been in a business class. Why do corporations exist? What's the thing that they're trying to maximize?
Monopoly.
Profit.
Monopoly.
Monopoly, profit, for who?
Themselves.
Shareholder profit. Maximization of shareholder profit, right? That's the whole purpose of a corporation. So if you really like want to nerd out about it, like Milton Friedman in like the 70s, this is the 1970s, so like not that, like this is like a long time ago. He writes, you know, in an article, and basically gets popularized this idea that the best way for our economy to function is if we have these things called corporations, and they're maximizing the return on shareholder profit, right? And so the way that they're organized, corporations are organized. So now you have the rise of like something called institutional investors. So it's not like you and me investing in, you know, so the majority of the stock market is not like individuals like you and me investing in it. It is these things called institutional investors. It's pension funds, it's insurance companies, it's mutual funds, it's these things that are basically, you know, investing, in what they're looking for is maximization of shareholder return, because those things benefit, you know, the common person, in theory, right? So that's something that's out there. Corporate governance changes, right? So now the purpose of like a board exists to basically make sure that the CEO and all the workers are not benefiting themselves, not even necessarily benefiting the customers, only benefiting the customers if it benefits shareholder profit or shareholder value. And then you have like corporate law and a bunch of things that start happening. Okay, I know I'm like, so where are we? What, couple minutes? Okay. Okay, I'm going to do this part as the discussion. So I'm going to do this part as the discussion. So I'm going to wrap up now. So you know all of this now, right? And some of it you're like, oh yeah, I knew that, I learned that, you know, I buried it in the recesses of my mind, or some of it's like, yeah, I kind of sort of knew that, but now I know a little bit more. What I want you guys to discuss, inshallah, and maybe we'll do, what time is it? 9:07? So let's do it for like 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and I just want to hear from some people. So within groups, what would you usually do in terms of groups? How big are the groups?
About 8 people, like this will be a group.
Okay, 8 people, right? So groups of 8, and let's do a little bit of a critique. Like, what's the critique of this system and this evolution of the system? What's wrong with it? Why is it something which is not good? And you might think of it from an Islamic point of view. You might just think about it from a social and society point of view. But I'd love to hear, like, what are some of the critiques and criticisms of this system that we call capitalism, and why it may not be the best thing for us. By the way, critique can also mean what is good about it for us. So challenge yourself within your group to also say, hey, this might be something that's still good for why we need it, but then here's something that's bad for it. Make sense? All right, let's discuss 15 minutes, and then we'd love to hear from you guys.
How'd you get this? Yeah, I went up there to buy it, and they told me